Everybody needs a refresher once in a while, right?
Yes.
Okay. The Gospel according to Mark. One of the teachers of the law asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? He being Jesus. The most important one, he answered, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your mind and all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these.
Mm-hmm.
This saying of Jesus, along with probably judge not lest you be judged, and his reference to the golden rule, are probably three of the most popular and quotable teachings of Jesus. However, this saying, love your neighbor as yourself, really didn't originate with Jesus. As he alluded to, he talked about the commandments. The commandments were from the Old Testament. This was actually a quote from the book of Leviticus, chapter 19:18. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus didn't claim to originate this. This principle, this idea was already in existence by the time Jesus was here. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's easy to say that, but what exactly does it mean? I believe that one of the other teachings of Jesus, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, really is the explanation of how you can love your neighbor as yourself. This is referred to as the golden rule. There's also the bronze rule and the silver rule, which are slight negative variations of this rule. The silver rule says, don't do to somebody else what you wouldn't want to do to you. Okay, so that's kind of like, you can get away with not doing something. But the golden rule is the positive. Instead of not doing, you are to do, which implies responsibility in how you live your life and in what you do. So I believe that this teaching of Jesus explains to us how we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. Easy to say, not so easy to do. Yesterday when I was trying to finish this, which sometimes it's all in my mind and I just can't get it out on a piece of paper or in a presentation, and I didn't feel well, and I've been cleaning house all day, and to be honest, my thought was, I don't care about my neighbor, I don't want to finish this. So, easy to say, not so easy to do. The premise of do unto others as you would have them do unto you is not unique to Judaism or Christianity. However, I forgot this. I do want to say this rule assumes that you are a rational, healthy individual. If I'm not a rational, healthy individual and I like to beat myself in the head with a hammer 3 times a day, just because I would want somebody to do that to me doesn't mean I should go out and do it to you. So the rule assumes that you're rational and healthy. Other religions also contain the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Of course, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism, of course Christianity, Islam, they all have some variation of this rule. Hinduism, this is the sum of duty. Do not unto others which would cause you pain if done to you. Hinduism, hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find harmful. Confucianism, surely it's a maxim of loving kindness. Do not unto others what you would not have them do to you. Taoism, I really like this one. Regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. Judaism, what is hateful to you, do not to your fellow man. That's from the Talmud, which was written sometime between the 1st century and 700 of the Common Era. Islam, no one of you is a believer until he desires for his brother that which he desires for himself. So those are all variations. You can read some of the other ones. They're all variations of that rule. Jesus also gave another example of love your neighbor as yourself in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Are any of you familiar with this parable? Okay. The Samaritans and the Jews were arch enemies. Jews hated Samaritans. They wouldn't spit on a Samaritan. They wanted nothing to do with them. Well, in this parable, the person who was the victim was the Jew, and the person who actually rendered help to him was the Samaritan. Didn't know him, paid for his the Jew was beaten up on the road to Jericho, and the Samaritan came along, picked him up, cleaned him up, took care of him, took him to get medical help, paid all the expenses, and offered to pay more when he came back through. To me, this is probably the best biblical example I can see of love your neighbor as yourself. The Samaritan knew that in all likelihood, on any common day of the week, if he was walking down the street, the Jew wouldn't go near him.
So he was a good Samaritan.
He was a good Samaritan. Now I realize this is an extreme case, and things like this don't happen to us every day where we have the opportunity or we feel the responsibility to pay for somebody's medical expenses and totally take care of them, totally, like the Samaritan did to the Jew. But there are some little everyday things that I feel we can do in our lives, at work, at school, in our families, just to demonstrate a little bit of love to our neighbor. 5 little ways to love my neighbor as myself. The first is to live and let live. You know, everybody is not going to believe what I believe. They're not going to live the way I live. They're not going to want the same things that I want. And they're going to do things differently than I do. I can't change everybody. Nobody can. But to constantly feel the pressure to push or indoctrinate or change someone and let that cause friction, to me, that's not really loving my neighbor. I need to let go of what I can't change and let somebody have their own beliefs and their own opinions and live their life the way they see fit to live it, whether I agree with it or not. So to me, live and let live is one way to love my neighbor. The other way is to overlook the not so good. You know, we all have little bumps in our personalities. I do. Ask Sarah, she can tell you what some of them are probably. But, you know, it's easy to see the negative in someone. I read somewhere, and I don't know how true it is, but in my own life and experience, I believe it's true, is that when we have a negative experience, those experiences are actually burned into your brain. The experience does something in your brain matter. That's why they're so hard to forget. That's why it's so easy to remember negative things as opposed to good things. So try to overlook the not so good and look at what you can find good in your neighbor. The next one is to validate feelings. Feelings aren't necessarily rational, but they're feelings and they're very real. Try to have compassion with other people's feelings. Validate their feelings and don't dismiss them as nonsense or something that are unworthy. Everybody wants to know that they're heard and that their feelings matter. Whether you can change it or do anything about the situation or not is different. But when you validate a person's feelings, I believe that you're loving your neighbor. And the other one is to erase the past. I know I don't, and I'm sure none of you want to live your life with the idea in your head that somebody will never let you forget what you did. They're always ready to bring it up when the time is right, or when they can use it as a ball bat to bash you with. I realize there's a lot of things that happen to us in our lives that are difficult to forget because they're negative and they're burned in there. But I believe that if we try to erase the past and get past it, give the benefit of the doubt, is a way to love your neighbor. I know I don't want to feel like somebody will never let me forget what I did. Back to the Gospel of Mark. And Houston, we have a problem. back to the Gospel of Mark. When I was putting this together and I was finalizing it, something struck me, and it stuck out to me, where Jesus said, "The Lord, our God, the Lord is one." Why did he say that? To me, he said this because God doesn't go against God. God works together to accomplish purposes, goals. There's no strife. And then he goes, love your neighbor as yourself. I believe that when we love our neighbors as ourselves, we work together. We can accomplish things. It gives us purpose. And in a sense, we are acting and living as God, working together for a purpose and to accomplish goals. That just hit me yesterday, in the last minute. I thought, well, there's a reason why Jesus said, the Lord, our God is one. Because I believe when we love our neighbor as ourselves, there's unity and there's wholeness. We'll all be one. So, I have a question. Which of the 7 principles, which we have very beautifully displayed, is not promoted by loving my neighbor as myself when I demonstrate that through the Golden Rule? We have the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Surely that is promoted when I live that way. Justice, equality, and compassion in human relations. I can see that. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. I can see that one. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and our society at large. I can see that. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. I can really see that one.
Yeah.
And respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. To me, loving my neighbor as myself and treating my neighbor like I want to be treated will promote each one of our principles. Like I said, easy to say, not necessarily so easy to do at times. That's all I have. Short and sweet. So,
That's wonderful. Thank you. Good job. Yes.
discussion?
I have a good story.
Yes.
Robert Whitaker, who is the president of the board of directors of Theater Workshop, and I think a good Christian, I think a really good Christian, will always, whenever the board begins to, let's say, pick on somebody or complain about somebody, Robert will always say, "Wait, I'm perfect, I'll start," which effectively shuts everyone up.
You know, love is one of those words that is used over and over, and so often that we sometimes lose the real meaning of what that word is. One definition of love that I heard one time is that it is having an outgoing concern for someone. In other words, I can sit here and think, well, I love Ann, and I love Sarah, and I love this one and that one, but if I don't do anything to make them know that, it's not really love. The outgoing part of it is making that love known by hugging them maybe on a Sunday when we greet each other. If they're ill, sending a card, taking a dish over to their house. So love, you know, it's a verb as well as a noun.
But if anybody had a broken arm and needed their grass mowed, do they doubt Randy would come to it?
Depends on how much grass.
I have a question for the congregation. When I was growing up, many a time my father would pick up a hitchhiker. And I did for a while, but I don't do it anymore. So am I loving my neighbor by not picking up a hitchhiker?
That's such a hard question for me.
Good can of worms.
That's
Yeah.
not
If that hitchhiker does you in, then you've done us a disservice. So.
Well,
You gotta be-
and I always figured everyone at my funeral would say, boy, what an idiot.
I've got something to say.
Wait a minute.
Back when I was 18 or 19, I hitchhiked one year to over 10,000 miles.
It was a long
And
time ago.
and I would not, I'd love to pick up hitchhikers, but I don't do it.
Yeah, me too.
It's just too dangerous.
The world has
I
changed.
tell you what, election day, I stopped to pick up a black man who was walking across from the theater and asked him if he needed a ride to the poll. Nice looking man, probably 55, he had 2 big bags, and I thought, you know, maybe he needed a ride, and I stopped and I asked him if he needed a ride, and he said, oh, no ma'am, I couldn't get in your car. What? And, you know, I felt, just a white woman all alone, and he felt like he couldn't get in my car. He probably had no idea what I wanted or what I might accuse him of, or who knows what.
Right.
He wouldn't get in my car.
That's the reason black people walk down the middle of the road instead of down on the sidewalk. They don't wanna
Yes.
get
I was
sued
really
or
sorry.
something.
I was sorry, but, you know, he's right, yes.
I have a few comments. First, I love that you mentioned live and let live, especially in a day and age where I think the climate is so much, you know, or I feel it anyway, that there's a certain fanatical religious faction that seems to be imposing, trying to indoctrinate, impose their beliefs on so many people. And also, you brought up an interesting thing, and you know, my background in recovery, which started out in Al-Anon, we have a certain saying in Al-Anon that you shouldn't do something for another adult human being that they are capable of doing for themselves, because that denies them the opportunity to do that for themselves and feel that growth and satisfaction for themselves. But more so, there's a certain do-gooder thing that can happen, you know, and you want to do good to make you feel good, but there's unintended consequences sometimes from that. And my example of that is that I have read that a great deal of the starvation in Africa is because at one time many of the tribes in Africa were migrated with the rainy seasons, and that was the way that they lived. And then Christian missionaries came in and they wanted to civilize them, and they taught them to stay put. And in doing that, they brought starvation on them. And because of their sense of doing good and civilizing them and bringing them to Jesus, and they brought starvation. So, you know, I think that sometimes, you know, we have to realize that and take a real deep look, you know, at what we're doing and ask the question, am I doing this to make myself feel better, and are there unintended consequences of this? You know, I am a recovering addict, and I see people on the street corners a lot of times, you know, with signs, homeless, you know, they're wanting money, and I think that I'm a very compassionate person, but most of the time I will not put money in another person's hand because I am a recovering addict. I will, if somebody's hungry, I will most certainly buy somebody food, but I'm not going to put cash in their hand because I know the deal. I know the deal, and I know that 100% of them out there are not addicts, but I don't know who is. I don't know who's going to go buy a bag or a rock. And I'm not buying it for myself, and I'm certainly not buying it for somebody else. So, you know, there are those issues that come to play. So I do my good deeds through the recovery community. Anybody that comes asking for help, I know that there is a way out of that, and I'm willing to share my experience, strength, and hope that way. But I'm not going to put money in somebody's hand that may use it to go out and just further that disease process. So, you know, I do think that carries a responsibility, that doing good thing carries a responsibility to search for your own motives and to look for unintended consequences in that process.
Thank you. I'd like to make one correction. I did pick up a hitchhiker this year. I'm sorry. But what happened was, I was coming up over the overpass, and this man literally jumped in front of my car. And I said, if anybody wants to ride that bad, I better give him one. I'm here today.
Yeah, but look at your arm.
Well, no, it has nothing to do with that. But, you know, so I wanted to just make a little correction there. And it did scare me, but I went ahead and picked him up.
I'd like to say that what Miss Spencer here, I forget the first name, Bethany, said, I'm going to sort of sum it up by saying, I think she's talking about wisdom. And in our RE class, we haven't quite gotten that for yet, but you need to temper love with wisdom. Mm-hmm. And by wisdom, we're meaning look at the long range. Immediately, you might feed your neighbor, but then he's hungry the next day too. The old saying, if you teach him to fish, he eats again. So love, that's what we're here for. That's coming out in our class here. We are here to love. One way to look at it is everything I do, is it for service to someone, to others, or is it service to myself? Mm. And it takes wisdom to be able to sort that out.
Oh, Molly, I want to say something real quick about learning to fish. Our boy Dylan is working at the Kroger on Frederica. Speaking of learning to fish.
Right. What a great thing.
This maybe just a little bit different spin on the commandments that you were talking about, and how is it put? The Lord is one, or
The Lord our God is one.
The Lord our God is one, which to me, and you know, it's translated differently, and it's a different ideology in Christianity. But you know, in the Eastern religions, it's all about realizing that we are all one, and that you're actually, the idea that you're a separate entity and you have, you know, this sense of self is actually false. But if you are all one, you are going to treat your neighbor as yourself, because you realize that we are all one. So it's a little bit different kind of perspective on it. And I'm thinking maybe that's what Jesus was trying to say with that. And it, you know, a lot of what he said was misinterpreted, I think, pretty seriously.
Well, and then also the other passage of scripture that talks about where he says, you know, when he told somebody that they wouldn't inherit eternal life because they saw him sick and didn't minister to him, and he was in prison and they didn't come to see him, and he was hungry and they didn't give him anything to eat, and they said, well, when did we see you that way? And he said, because you didn't do it to somebody else.
That's right.
So to me, now, I mean, of course, I grew up learning that these passages all meant something else.
Right.
But now as I'm a little older, I'm thinking, he's saying that because we're all one and we're all part of God. So how I treat you is how I'm treating myself and everybody else in the universe, because we're all one. That's how I look at that now. So. Anyone else have something?
Molly?
Go, let it fly, baby.
I was just gonna get back now. I want my comments on. Sorry.